Most people think real estate is about money. That assumption keeps them stuck, watching from the sidelines. The truth is, real estate's about structure, how deals are designed, how risk is managed, and how capital is attracted, not chased. This show exists for people who don't want information. They want to learn how to execute. I'm Mike Morawski. I'm a real estate investing coach who teaches investors how to acquire and finance real estate with little or no money down by mastering terms, leverage, and deal structure. Hey, look, markets change, rates move, but structure works in every cycle. Real estate isn't bought with money, it's built with structure. This is the Mic Drop Show.
Hey, good morning, everybody, and welcome back. Happy belated New Year's. I hope your new year is off to a great start, and you're being intentional, right? Being intentional about where you're going and what you're doing. But this week was Martin Luther King Day, and I hope that that was meaningful for you in whatever way it was. But welcome to the Mic Drop Show, where we bring clarity and structure to real estate, financial strategies. I'm Mike Morawski. I'm here every Wednesday morning at 7:30 Pacific time and 9:30 Central, where we take a closer look at the framework that actually protects investors. Hey, this episode's airing just a couple of days after January 19th, right after our live masterclass. And the timing matters because what I want to address today is one of the exact misconceptions that shows up every time markets tighten and assumptions get tested. Today's not about deals, it's about returns. And it's not about tactics. You know what? Today's going to be about judgment. And, I usually am not the kind of person that judges things or judges people, but today we're going to talk about judgment. Specifically, we're going to be correcting one of the most common and most dangerous misconceptions in real estate, and that's investing. That cash flow is the primary measure of a good deal. We're going to talk about what it's about and what it's not about. So if you're listening for formulas, for benchmarks, for underwriting tips, this episode's not going to give that to you. It's not going to tell you what percentage is healthy. It's not going to tell you how to break down expenses. And I'm not going to show you how to stress test a deal, because none of that actually solves the problem we're talking about. What we're talking about today is how to go slower and to do things that really matter and are more important. We're examining why cash flow becomes a standout for safety, and why that belief completely exposes investors when conditions change. This is not a beginner mistake. It's structural misunderstanding that shows up in experience level. You hear it everywhere. If it cash flows, it's a great deal. As long as it pays every month, you're fine. Cash flow is king. That language is everywhere. Books, podcasts, social medias, gurus, investor meetups. And I understand why it sticks. I understand why it makes sense. Cash flow feels concrete. It feels visible. It arrives on schedule like it should. So investors start treating income as evidence of intelligence and discipline. If a deal produces cash flow, they assume it sounds as if it's unflawed. And that's not necessarily true. That's a misunderstanding. Cash flow is not the measure of deal quality. It's a byproduct of structure and may be something that you can understand easily. And when you confuse outcomes with structure, you take risks without realizing it. You know what? Why does cash flow feel so much like protection? There's a psychological reason and a misconception for investors. Cash flow provides reassurance. It creates feedback. It reinforces the idea that brings that things are under control, and that feedback creates confidence. Sometimes it's false confidence, though. But confidence is not the same thing as safety. Steady income often reduces scrutiny. Write that down if you're not driving, and you can write that down. But steady income often reduces scrutiny. It delays hard questions of what's really going on. It creates the illusion that risk has already been handled. As long as the money shows up, investors stop examining what mostly is true about a deal because it keeps showing up, and then till it doesn't show up anymore, right? That's not discipline. That's not comfort. The comfort is the expense reduction when the market shifts. Experience and judgment is what helps cash flow to show up or not show up. Here's the part investors tend to miss. Cash flow does not tell you how fragile the deal is. Think about that for a minute. Cash flow doesn't actually tell you how fragile the deal is, how dependent it is on external conditions, how much margin actually exists, or how quickly the situations can deteriorate if assumptions change. You have to watch assumptions because they change. I've seen plenty of deals perform exactly as projected, right up until they didn't anymore, because you took your eye off the ball. And you can't take your eyes off of it anymore. People get into cash flow and they think that everything is fine. Not because investors were careless, not because the math was wrong. It's just the market shifted. Structure was misunderstood. The income created too much confidence. The confidence delayed judgment, and the delayed judgment increased your exposure. Have you ever seen that happen? Have you been part of that? Cash flow didn't fail them. The reliance on the cash flow did. It's a blind spot. You ever drive down a road, look in the mirror, and all of a sudden there's a car next to you? That's your blind spot. Same thing with cash flow. Here's the quiet risk. Cash flow is visible. Structure is not. You can see the income, but you can't see the fragility, the fragileness until it shows up. All of a sudden, hits your blind spot. There it is. And you're saying, what the hell happened? So investors optimize for what's easy to measure instead of what actually governs outcomes. They trust performance without understanding dependency. What is really true? What is accurate? And when those dependencies shift, cash flow doesn't give it notice. You know what? It breaks like a broken arm. It disappears after damage has already started and you missed it. And I say that because I want you to think about investing, right? Right now, if you're waiting for the markets to change and you're waiting for mainstream media to say the markets have changed, you're going to miss 18 to 24 months of this change in the market. This whole investing platform and all of your investments are about paying attention, thinking things through. Belief survives because of convenience. Cash flow is easy to explain, easy to market. It's easy to post outline. Structure requires context. Risk requires judgment, and judgment doesn't compress well into sound bites. So as I keep thinking about this, so the industry defaults to what's easy to communicate, not what actually protects investors. So it's easier to say what should happen, what could happen, or what might be happening, rather than how do we protect the investor. And most people never realize they inherited that bias. They're not reckless, they're not incomplete. It's an intentional gap. This is why do-it-yourself thinking fails every time. I see so many people say, I'm going to do it myself. I'm going to run my own deal. I'm going to buy my own deal. I'm going to do it myself. In essence, that's not always the smart thing to do, especially getting started. Why not be with somebody, partner with someone who's already doing it, who's having some results, who's made some mistakes along the way and knows what to look out for. This is where I need to draw a hard line with people. You don't really fix misconceptions by adding more metrics. There's no checklist that turns cash flow into protection. There's no calculator that replaces judgment. There's no shortcut that removes structural risk. Most investors don't get hurt because they didn't try hard enough. They get hurt because they trusted visible signs without understanding what made those signals possible. What a true statement. If I think back in my history and the losses that I've had because I paid attention to the wrong things or didn't pay attention to the signals, to the red flags that showed up, and today I spend a lot more time paying attention to those things. That's not a knowledge problem. It's a judgment problem. Judgment comes in where you say, hey, I think I got this handled. I know it all. But judgment doesn't come from copying someone else's criteria. What I'm doing here is I'm explaining to you what to watch out for. I'm not going to explain what to replace cash flow with. I'm not going to walk through structure. I'm not going to give you a framework that's going to build it for you, not because it's hidden, but because partially understanding is dangerous. Think about that for a minute. Write that down. Partial understanding is dangerous. Pulling pieces out of context creates false confidence. And false confidence is exactly what this episode is warning you against. For those of you who joined in my January 19th masterclass, this episode should have reinforced why context matters more than metrics. And if you weren't there, the full discussion, how structure, risk, and judgment actually interact, that's what I cover inside the free live masterclass that I did when it was running. That's that's appropriate place for conversation. So cash flow is not protecting, it's not validation, and it's not a substitute for structure. It's the result that you get from all the activity and actions that you put into play, from paying attention to watching the details, to participating, to taking massive action. And it results only, the cash flow results only tell you what's happening right now, not what's down the road, not what happened yesterday, not what's going to happen, but what's happening right now. Hey, listen, I know I was judgmental today. That's just part of, me bringing different context to you. And I'm here every Wednesday bringing that different context to you. But that's all for today. I want to talk to you about your real estate investing. So if you're thinking, man, I really want to be a real estate investor, I want to do it myself, I want to do it with somebody else, I want to have a great partner, you know what? I'd love to have the conversation with you. Reach out to me. The Mic Drop show here is understanding the first step. It's about understanding the first step. It's about structure and what can keep you safe. I want to teach people how to be safe and help you walk through the full context of all of that. So I have another masterclass coming up, and watch for the details on that. And what we're going to do is we're going to walk through a lot of structure and a lot of context. But thanks for joining me here. I'll be here next Wednesday at 7:30 Pacific, 9:30 Central. And I certainly look forward to you being part of this show with me, grabbing your coffee, sitting in, settling in, driving in the car to work, wherever you're at, whatever you're doing, and participating. Hey, thanks for being here this morning. I hope you have a great week.